This passage that we're reading, like the verse there that ends this story, the ladies have gone. Remember, yesterday was Saturday, and for the Hebrew people, they don't work on Saturday. They don't do those energy-intensive, labor-intensive things on Saturday. In fact, I heard a preacher speaking recently. He was talking about modern practice. Hebrews weren't allowed to light a fire. Jews weren't allowed to light a fire on Saturday. And so there are some groups of Jewish people in the modern day who tried to think, well, what's our modern fire lighting practices? And so for some of those people, they said, well, we use electricity, and that's kind of like a fire. So maybe for us, celebrating Sabbath today or honoring Sabbath day, that means we're not allowed to use any electricity. So this preacher was talking about how interesting that is and the implications it has for modern life. And he said there was a businessman, I don't know if this story is true, but it reflects sort of the attitude really, really well. This businessman was in a city, was in New York City, and there was an elevator. And the elevator didn't have buttons inside it. It went, or rather, you didn't press the buttons. It just stopped at every floor on the Sabbath day. So you got in on floor 1, and it stopped on floor 2, and it stopped on floor 3, and it stopped on floor 4. The reason was, for those Jews who wanted to honor God, but couldn't complete an electrical circuit, they couldn't push the button to say this is the floor we want to go to. So on Saturdays, they had a Sabbath elevator that would stop at every floor. And for this gentleman who came in and was surrounded by these Jewish guys who were going to their they were going wherever they needed to be on Saturday. And he said, "That's great, and I'm impressed with your devotion to the Lord. But is there a Gentile elevator I can use where we can push the buttons?" And they said yes, and they showed him to the Gentile elevator. And then they all got in behind him and asked him to press the buttons for them so they could go to the floors, and they didn't have to wait as well. I don't know how true that story is, but it reflects the desire of the Hebrew people to follow God's law whatever the context they found themselves in. And for these ladies and those who were with them who had traveled to Jerusalem, Saturday, the day after Jesus died, was a day of rest. They weren't allowed to do stuff. They weren't allowed to work. They weren't allowed to labor. And so Jesus dies on Friday, and on the day of rest, they have to wait. It's Holy Saturday, and we wait. So on Sunday morning, the rest is over. We can get back to it. And these ladies head out to the grave where Jesus has been laid, and on Sunday morning, they go there early in the morning. They were obviously much more diligent than all the disciples who came with Jesus, because they're the only ones who go at daybreak. The other disciples, if you read, it says when they came back from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11. Those 11 guys were supposed to be Jesus' closest friends. They were the ones he worked with most intensely through those years of his ministry, but they slept in on Sunday morning. The ladies were the ones who went. And because those ladies, in their diligence and their eagerness, were the first ones there, they were also the first ones to receive the message. Tragically, nobody believed them when they told everybody else. They did not believe the women because the words seemed to them like nonsense. Are you strange? Actually, I shouldn't even bother to ask the question. You are strange. There's some way you're strange. You're weird. You are. I do not thrive in chaos, which if you look at my desk, that doesn't seem to be the case, but there's order on my desk. I call it chronological stratification. I can tell you approximately when I last had something, and I just go down in the pile until I get to something that's older than that, and I know I've gone too far, and I go back once, right? So over time, the pile gets bigger, so I can find my stuff. As long as you don't touch it, I can find it. That's how my pile works. I don't like chaos, and my wife pointed something out to me not long ago, that we were sitting in the Wendy's on Great Northern Road, and I had a conversation with someone. I heard a kid singing a song that was it was a camp song, and I talked to them, and I was feeling a little unsettled, and I sat down at the table, and my wife looked at me and said, "You're folding your napkin." And she pointed out that I was taking the napkin, I was unfolding it, I was refolding it, and I was putting the creases in, so they were nice and sharp in my napkin. Since that time, every time we sit down at a restaurant, my wife will wait for it to happen and then point it out to me. I almost always fold my napkins when I sit at a restaurant, because there's something about putting that napkin in order that helps me sort of deal with whatever else chaos is in my life. It's like, I can't control anything, but this napkin, it'll be folded right. I would say that makes me strange. I remember when I was at camp, Melody and I served at camp when we were first married, and one of the things we talked about with the counselors was we had a group of kids come in from inner city in one of the Southern Ontario cities, and really poor, difficult part of town they came from. They came from a church would sponsor these kids from the inner city to come up to camp. And one of the things we had to go over with our counselors was, you're going to have kids that are going to take food and they're going to hide it in their room somewhere. They're going to put it in their sleeping bag, they're going to hide it in the beds. We had to get them ready for that because we knew every year we'd have kids who at home, food was not something you had all the time, and especially good food that you really liked. And typically we tried to serve at camp good food that the kids really liked. We didn't want, if you go to camp, we're not feeding them Brussels sprouts and telling them you have to finish this or you're not allowed to go on and play outside. We don't want to do that. Camp is supposed to be fun. It's not supposed to be work for the kids. At least part of it. Even when there's work, we make it fun for the kids. So we had food that the kids liked. But a lot of these kids who are coming from these really challenging home situations, for them, the food wasn't always there. So if you had a chance to take some back and hide it and store it, you could go back and enjoy it later. Problem is, there are mice in the cabins, there are rodents who get in. So we need to let the staff know there are going to be behaviors that these kids are exhibiting, there's going to be things that they're doing, and it's going to seem strange to you. But there's a reason for it. There's a reason for it. And not only is there a reason for it, you need to understand why they're doing what they're doing, and you need to love those kids in light of the way they are and where they're coming from and what they're doing. And one of the challenges was, this is an opportunity for us to show grace to these kids in a way they don't necessarily get to see at home. Camp gets to be not only a place of fun, but it gets to be a place of love and grace and kindness and restoration. Why are you the way you are? Why are you weird? Can I encourage you? Can you be weird for the right reasons? Find a reason to be strange. Find a reason to be unbelievable. These women, Mary and Joanna, the ladies that were with Jesus, nobody believed them because they had experienced something so incredible. Their message made them stand out. It says in verse 12, we could have had Adley come up and share the other kids if we wanted to. When I post this on the internet, it's going to seem so strange. They're going to have no idea. I just stopped and talked to no one for a second. I'm like, the women came back and they told this story, and their words sound like nonsense. The Christian message, the message of Resurrection Sunday, should be so different from everything else we experience in this world. There should be a sense in which when we verbalize this message, when we speak it out loud, there should be part of us that says, can this really be true? Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean by that? Can I pick on some of our blue-blooded people here in the message, in the service today? I'm going to pick on you, and I'm sorry, you're easy targets. If I told you the Maple Leafs are going to win the Stanley Cup next year, you would say to yourself, can that really be true? Look at the season they're having this year. It would be incredible to you. And yet, may I say, it's possible. Austin Matthews could return from his knee injury, and he could be on fire like never before. There could be a couple postseason acquisitions that come in and completely change the dynamic of the team. They could hire a new management staff. The coach could find this key message that reaches the players, and the Maple Leafs could come back next year and go from dumpster fire to Stanley Cup champions. It is possible. But yeah, I can hear you. I can feel the waves of skepticism coming. I want to let you know the message we just heard is more remarkable than that. I'm using something trivial on purpose. The reality is, our lives will not change when someone else wins the Stanley Cup next year. The message of Jesus being alive can change everything. And it should change everything. Jesus who died is alive. These women go to find their friend entombed in a grave. That's what they're expecting to find. And instead, these messengers come and say, he is not here. He is alive. It's no wonder they didn't believe him. People don't just disappear from their graves. But Jesus did. Is that what your life looks like? Like when people, if you're a follower of Jesus, does your life look like that? Do people not believe you because you have so much joy and peace and love and patience, gentleness? Is your life incredible? It should be. We should be so full of the message of good news that people look at us and think we're weird. There's a story about that in the Old Testament. Through our men's breakfast, we went through the story of David, or we took one look at one story from David's life. David, who is the king of Israel. David, who is one of the most famous people in all the Bible. We're looking at how does David teach us how to be real men in this world. But there's a story about David where husbands and wives, have you ever been out with your spouse and you're out with them and you just walk away and like, I don't want anybody to know they're with me right now. We got a story like that. We got a story where my wife slowly slips her wedding ring off, puts it in her pocket, and just looks at me like the rest of the crowd is looking at me, hoping nobody noticed that they came in with me. I'm going to begin, it's 2 Samuel chapter 6 where we find the story. And I'm going to start reading in verse 12. Now King David was told, the Lord has blessed the household of Obed-Edom and everything he has because of the ark of God. Now I need to give a little background because the ark of God, have you seen Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark? That's the ark they're talking about. I mean, it was fake in the movie. I'm not saying that Indiana Jones actually found the Ark of the Covenant, but they were looking for this ark. And this ark was built by the people of Israel, and wherever it went, it represented for them that their God was with them. His presence was there with them. And it rested in the most sacred place, of this tent that they had, the tabernacle. And because that ark represented the presence of God with his people, God then blessed this household of Obed-Edom and everything he had, because it was a sign that God's presence was with his people. That's what it meant for them. So David, seeing that, he goes down and he wants to bring the presence of God to the very center of Israelite life, to the very center of Hebrew life, his capital, Jerusalem, the city of David. So David went down and he brought up the ark of God, and he went from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. When those who were carrying the ark of the Lord had taken 6 steps, he sacrificed a bull and a fattened calf. So they didn't even get very far down the road, right? David is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, stop, everybody stop. We're gonna stop, we're gonna pray, we're gonna have a sacrifice to God. And then they continue back on the road. David, wearing a linen ephod, danced before the Lord with all his might. I want you to think about that statement. It says, David danced before the Lord with all his might, while he and his entire house, the entire house of Israel, brought up the ark of the Lord with shouts and the sounds of trumpet. When was the last time you were so excited you danced with all your might? I want you to think about it. For some of you, it's been a while, hasn't it? Can I tell you the last time I experienced something similar to this? I know I'm leaning heavily into the hockey metaphors. I'm sorry, it's almost playoff time. That's sort of where my brain's at. The last time we experienced this was during the Four Nations face-off last February. My kids, who haven't really grown up in a hockey world, I love playing hockey, I love watching hockey. My family doesn't necessarily get into it the same way I do, but some of them do. And so we decided when Canada was playing the U.S. in the Four Nations face-off, we would go and we went to a restaurant in the Sioux, and we sat down in a restaurant full of people. In fact, it was so full of people that when we arrived an hour before the game, there was nowhere to sit. I had called in advance, said, can we get a reservation? They said, no, you cannot. Show up and hope for the best. And so as we arrived, there were no seats for a group of 3. There were seats for a group of 6, though. And so there were 3 gentlemen who were there behind us and said, tell you what, do you guys want to get together and we'll sit together and then we can go get our seat, we can sit at the table for 6. And we sat there with them. And my kids got to watch 3 complete strangers sit and watch a hockey game with us. And I say my kids watch that because when we left, one of the things they talked about was observing those other people in the restaurant and how they responded as the hockey game went on. And you could tell, if you need to use the washroom, everybody got up at the intermission. And everybody rushed to the washroom at intermission because you didn't want to miss a minute of play. And all the food was ordered, and you could tell that everybody was ordering at the same time because it all came out at the same time. We were all in exactly the same place. Our focus was exactly the same. It was exactly the same. There was a laser focus to the whole thing. And the moment that goal was scored in overtime, the place exploded. My kids had never been in an environment where an entire restaurant full of people started screaming at the same time like that before. There was so much joy, we couldn't keep it in. And it was something as trivial as a hockey game that inspired it. Why don't I get like that in my day-by-day life? David was so ridiculously overjoyed that as his wife watches him, listen, as the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, watched from a window, and when she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, she despised him in her heart. He was so full of joy, he made himself look like a fool, and his wife looked at him and said, I can't believe you're behaving like that. You're the king, for crying out loud. Have some self-respect. Here's the challenging word I have for you. Does the resurrection of Jesus make you feel like that? Does it make other people respond to you like that? Because it should. We should be so excited about these little tokens that we have on the table in front of us. We should go out and people should think we are weird because we have hope where there is very little reason for hope. I want to read to you the verse that we've left out because this story sort of ends in verse 12. We only read to verse 11. It says in verse 12, Peter, however, got up and he ran to the tomb. Bending over, he saw the strips of linen lying by themselves, and he went away, wondering to himself what had happened. I love that word, wonder. This Sunday should fill us with wonder. We should leave this place thinking, this is beyond belief. Paul had a prayer that he prayed for the Ephesian church, and I want to read it to you as I bring this to a close. I want you to catch the wonder of Easter. I want you to catch the wonder of Easter. I want you to have the same wonder that Peter had. And this is what Paul prays for the Ephesian church in Ephesians 3. He says, for this reason I kneel before the Father from whom his whole entire family in heaven and on earth derives its name. I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. The living Jesus, who wasn't in the grave, but was alive. Paul says, I want him to not just be alive somewhere, but I want him to be alive in you. I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have the power together with all the saints, to grasp how wide and how long and how deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses our knowledge, that you may be filled with the full measure and all the fullness of God. God's love is so big and deep and high and long that you can swim and swim and swim and you'll never get to the end. You ever seen one of those movies where they're shipwrecked and they're in that little raft? You know that inflatable raft that pops open and it fills with air and you're on the ocean? In every direction, there's nothing but water. I can't imagine being on the sea for days and days and days and all you see is wave after wave after wave after wave. Is it any wonder people go crazy in situations like that? You begin to start seeing things. Was that a ship? Have you ever been on a large body of water and you sort of see the horizon and like if you go hiking in Superior Provincial Park, sometimes you go and look out over the lake and you're just able to see something. You can't tell what it is, but it's just on the horizon there's something and you wonder what it is. Every time your eyes lay on something that wasn't more water, you'd wonder, is that a ship? Are we finally saved? It would be enough to fill you with desperation. But what if it wasn't hopelessness? What if the ocean was love? What if it was grace? What if it was God day after day? All you saw sweeping past was images, messages, symbols, signs. You are loved. You are loved. You are loved. What if every wave? Have you ever fallen asleep with by a lakeside? Teddy and I one year, after church, we was just spontaneous. We went and we stayed at Pancake Bay. Just like, we just went and took a tent, we stayed at Pancake Bay. And we fell asleep to the sound of water lapping on the shore. You ever fallen asleep like that? Yes, we brought Buddy the dog that time, yes. And you fall asleep, and all you hear as you're falling asleep is those soft lapping of the waves on the shore. What if that shoreline was the whisper of love from God? I love you, I love you, I love you. That's what Resurrection Sunday is all about. It's about Jesus who not only said, I love you, not only did acts of kindness to people around him, not only died because we all will die. Resurrection Sunday is a living man standing on the other side of death saying this is how real and solid and confident you can be, that God loves you. I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have the power together with all the saints to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ. And to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled with all the measure of the fullness of God. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work in us. To him be the glory in the church in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever. Amen. Well, there's nothing left for me to say after that, right? Let's pray.